Hi, everyone. I hope you are all staying well. I hope you are warm, but not too warm. I hope you are making it through the world, as exciting a place as it is right now. This is the next in my 2026 series of conversations with Whatttt, where we are going through my 2024 essays. For March and April, we are unpacking a series of 2 essays on physical literacy. In 2024, I was hot out of my master's, which had a heavy focus on the academic sense of physical literacy, which is a subject in movement and sports science, and especially in youth development. That was a huge part of my graduate studies. And so we, in this episode, unpack some of the history, some of my understandings, and some of Rachel's understandings about what physical literacy is and how it has influenced our teachings on the floor. This conversation has been a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to have, and I hope you enjoy it and that this term starts to seep into your brain and influence the way you think about what your goals are as a teacher and how you're recognizing what learning looks like in your students. Enjoy our conversation, and I will see you on the other side.
Oh, hey, it's so nice to see your face.
It's good to see you too. You know what happened 3 days ago or 4 days ago? Mercury came out of retrograde. I am not kidding. Sometimes I do not notice it or believe in it. And then other times, none of my technology works and I lose all of my cords and I cannot find anything. And then Mercury comes, and then Mercury comes out of retrograde and all of a sudden, all my Zoom meetings start working and my cameras start working and my audio starts working and everything's good again. And it's hilarious. Yeah.
It's been a minute since I read your essay. So
Right.
I'm kind of excited for today's conversation because maybe some fresh stuff will have been digested since last time and I'll have different takes on everything.
Me too.
I
I also remember some of the names that I'm supposed to remember. I also went back and read my essay since we tried this last time. So
you know the name of the lady that invented physical literacy as a research term?
Ta-da! I read basically everything she's written when I was doing graduate school and definitely remember her name now. So
New this week, I learned that there are 3.79 liters in a gallon. There's my Aussie to American factoid for today's combo.
Right. And I'll bet that factoid has something to do with the price of gasoline.
Maybe.
It sounds like a really big national emergency. It does.
It is.
Yes.
The Prime Minister addressed the nation last night on television for all of 3 minutes and basically said, enjoy your Easter. But yeah, it's a big deal.
All right. But here we go. We are diving in to March essay number 1, which was about physical literacy. So this was a part of a 2-part essay from 2024 when I'd just come out of my graduate school studies and I was writing about physical literacy, which is an academic concept that I spent a bunch of time studying and thinking about and learning about and wrote about some in my own terms. When I went back and read the essays, I was like, oh, these essays are a real mix of Adam's thinking and academic world thinking, which are not always lined up. So here we go, into conversation.
So this is take 2. Thank you, technology. I think the thing that kind of really struck me when I first read your essay, and I will admit it's been a while since, but yes, you introduced this idea of affordances, and yes, you unpacked what physical literacy as a research term has kind of meant in the past. But you also finished with this really kind of nice idea of how you apply it to your movement practice and to your movement teaching practice. And so I wanted to just remind you that physical literacy as one of your hashtags was another thing that really drew me to you. So what is it for you now, having researched physical literacy, having been someone who's moved in this space for a little while? When you say the word physical literacy, what do you think people think?
What a great question. I have no idea at this point what anyone else thinks of that term.
I mean, you told me that the hashtag doesn't get you more reach or doesn't, make academics come across your account any better necessarily.
I thought it would. I thought that would be a thing.
You found me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I think it's a hashtag I put in there more in the interest of being I think more circus people or more movement teachers should be familiar with this term because I think it's a really important term. And I think this like side of academic research that is at the intersection of sports psychology and movement study is is really the next step in how we think about teaching and doing movement and how we think about
Mm,
training athletes and how we think about training general population and how we think about rehabbing from injury. And it's really it's a term that I first heard at an American Circus Educators Conference in a keynote speech by Dr. Dean Creelars. He brought the term physical literacy to his keynote speech and has been one of the really like lead researchers thinking about this concept and publishing research in it and on it and developing what the idea actually is in an academic sense. He's not the progenitor of it. That was Margaret Whitehead, who wrote the very first article in, I think it was 2001, entitled like The Concept of Physical Literacy. And it was in a physical education journal and was at a time when literacy as an idea was a really big part of how we measure educational progress when we're thinking about physical education in schools, when we're thinking about the general population's way of moving and whether or not they do move or are motivated to move or are motivated to learn about movement. Like physical literacy was a really good term for describing a set of skills and social opportunities and movement opportunities and like environmental features that are a really important part of how people engage with movement and engage with the world around them or don't engage with movement or don't engage with the world around them. And
right.
so I was really interested in like our generations, right? We're kind of the same, like the 80s babies, the early 90s babies. We're really in this generation where people 10 years older than me have very little, let's call it technological literacy, but have a lot of really good ideas and a lot of really solid like understanding of the world and research and things. But that knowledge that they have needs to make it into the digital world via us who have
Mm,
a connection to them, but also enough digital literacy to put the knowledge out there in accessible ways.
yeah. It's a pretty loaded word, right? To call yourself or to call someone illiterate. It's interesting what you say there about participating in movement or not, like whether you choose to speak that language or not, whether you can talk digital to someone. If I want to, go get an IT person to help me with a tech problem, can I even like terms like payment gateway and things that I've learned only from building my website has meant that I am relatively literate to engage with those services or those people who are speaking that language. I always think of like, I think back to one of the first lectures when I started my physio degree, and they said basically physiotherapy is we're all going to learn a language, another language, so that we as professional physiotherapists can talk more efficiently to each other. It's also going to have the downside of making other people who aren't physiotherapist graduates feel stupid because you say scapula when the rest of the population says shoulder blade. And I remember thinking as I was going into second and third year of being like, yeah, don't get I was in love with the language. Anatomy is like a whole nother language, literally, but also as a way of communicating. It's like another way of discussing something in a much more deep, much more precise, much more accurate, much more nuanced way. So I was drawn to it. But I remember graduating and being like, patella. What the heck? What's the actual word for patella? No one says patella, right? Like, come on, kneecaps. Like I remember talking to a client and being like, your round floaty bone. And it was embarrassing because I'm like, okay, jargon creeps in. So it's interesting because I think literacy gives you access and encourages participation, and not having it as be a big factor as to whether you can or not. So it was just interesting for me to have that reflection since our last chat about like, oh, yeah, it's not inherently offensive to talk about literacy, but it does pit a literate group against an illiterate one.
Well, and there's some interesting history I think that I bring up in the essay about kind of the history of the term and how it's been used in research and that it kind of carries two different meanings.
Mm.
I think I call it a sandcastle word at one point. And what I intended by sandcastle word is it's one of those words that that when you look at it, you're like, oh, I know exactly what that word means, right? I have a sense of what it means. I have a sense of connotations about it. But the moment that you start to get closer to it, you're like, oh, that's not a castle. That's just made of sand. And then if you poke at it a little bit, like the whole thing kind of falls down and totally changes on you. So one
Becomes
of
a
the ways
mermaid.
it becomes a mermaid, right? It just like falls into the sea, and
It
you're like, oh, this word doesn't mean anything unless we talk about it to decide what it means. And one of the ways it's used in research originally in like the 50s by UNESCO was as a measure, a population wide measurement, where the definition of it was really meant to create the binary you're talking about. Is someone literate or illiterate? And the defining line there was literate in that sense meant that they could read and write a simple sentence describing everyday life. So if you could both read and write a simple sentence about your everyday life. Today I woke up and went to the market. And if you could read that sentence and write that sentence in your native language, you were considered literate. And if you
Mm.
couldn't read or write that sentence in your native language or understand signs, you know, road signs or merchant signs in your village or in your city, then you were illiterate. And they were using it to measure literacy population wide with the kind of worldwide goal of increasing literacy across the world. And that was kind of one definition of literacy. But the moment that you start to use literacy as a broader term, you begin to realize like immediately the concept kind of falls apart. Sure. Okay. So read or write a sentence about daily life in your native language. Okay. Well, does that mean
Yeah.
I'm illiterate in French? Like I can write a basic sentence in French about my everyday life, but does that make me literate in French?
Mm.
Can I read, even if my native language is English, can I read Shakespeare or a line of poetry and really understand what's
And
being
know
said?
what it means?
And not only know what it means, yeah, like understand it or interpret it to other people or have any sense of like what's going on within that. And so
Mm.
in the broader sense, literacy started to come to mean a sense, a set of skills that we use to navigate different domains of the world. So it's not just a set of physical skills, it's also a set of social skills, it's also a set of cultural understandings. If we say someone is technologically literate, we don't just mean that they can like read the instructions for their VCR or read the instructions for their computer. We mean that they have internalized like a set of symbols and processes and social cues that allow them to not only interact with technology on a regular basis, but encounter new technology with some facility, interact
Mhm.
with the environments of technology in ways that make sense. If someone is technologically literate and sees an elevator for the first time, they might go, oh, here's a door and it's closed, but there's a button right next to it. Buttons mean push. What I do with buttons is push them. So I'm going to push the button and see what happens. And oh, now I'm in the elevator. Oh, there's numbers here on buttons. You know, like how intuitively would you be able to understand how to interact with an elevator? And I think we take the base knowledge and context of a question like that a little for granted. And
Mm.
physical literacy just takes that idea into the movement zone. How do you encounter new physical environments? How do you interact with them? How do you solve problems within them?
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, the idea of movement as a language, which has the capacity to communicate and to facilitate conversation, might be like almost a step further, right? Because I think of a better word or another word for literacy, seeing as that we're not making it such a binary thing. And in practice, it becomes far less binary, right? So then fluency becomes much more nuanced measure, a bit more of a spectrum on the ability to solve movement problems, have a conversation with your canvas, communicate with your movement. And that's why I like that analogy or that metaphor for movement being a language, because languages don't just, they're not just for the purpose of reading and writing. It's not just in your native tongue. It's also with a hoop versus a silk versus a hammock versus a pole versus something else. And that specific situation with those affordances, which we'll get to later, are going to be the things that elicit certain responses and actions from us. So, like when I learn a foreign language, the most important thing for me to learn is like how to say, I don't speak this language well. Can you slow down? I don't know this word in this language. What does this mean? Those are the most important kind of things rather than statements, which is basically just quoting sounds. And I often think about movement in that space, like with the invention of social media and sharing the proliferation of all this information that we have about movement. You could argue that communication is higher than ever in the movement spaces, or information is being exchanged in larger volumes. And yet, I often feel like there's a real gap there because we're not actually, information is not the same as knowledge.
The Right. We're not actually, people aren't becoming more literate. People aren't becoming more fluent in movement. People are getting better at mimicry in
Mm.
movement. And there's an important kind of fundamental difference there between invention and mimicry, right? Now, I want to be very careful in like qualifying that statement a little bit because we're making an analogy throughout this conversation between language and movement. And at some point I want to draw those lines really clearly, but for now we're going to stay in the analogy about language for a moment. When a baby is learning language, they do learn language by mimicking. There's no other thing to do other than go, oh, like I'm a baby, I'm supposed to mimic these sounds. These sounds, you realize when you're a baby that these sounds that people are making contain meaning and
Mm.
contain information, right? There's a shape that I receive food from, and when I say mama, I get more food. I get the attention of that shape and the food arrives. So I'm going to say mama a lot, right? Mama food, mama food.
Yeah.
You get this positive feedback from,
Pavlovian.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah.
there's a process of investigation and discovery with new words. If you work with
Mm.
young children, like 4 and 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, you realize they're exploring language. Sometimes they say fascinating, weird things as they're discovering how language works. So it's a process of both mimicry and exploration and invention, right? And what I think we fall into sometimes as movement teachers, to draw the analogy a little more clearly now, is just teaching our students to say a sentence and just forcing them to just mimic the same sentence over and over. And when we leave out the exploration and invention, we're just kind of making people who may be able to restate the same statement to us, like say, uh, hola, me llamo Adam, ¿cómo estás? Right? Like, but without attaching any conversation to it, without attaching any context to it, without allowing them to move in and out of the language in different ways and make mistakes.
Mm.
We all know that the best way to learn a foreign language is to be immersed in it, right? Rather than just learning it from Duolingo or just repeating phrases over and over into the abyss. You have to
Yes.
surround yourself in it. You have to interact with it. You have to use it contextually and make mistakes. And how can our movement teaching be more like that and less like asking our students to memorize facts?
Mm. Mm. And I think the gap between like teaching them how to say, for example, if you like just copy someone's video off of Instagram, you're effectively like a musician creating a cover, or like a journalist quoting someone. That's what you're doing. You're quoting their movement, if we just lean hard into this analogy. And to be able to get up and say your own idea, to be able to ask a question or pose a statement as a question, ask a rhetorical question. There's so many linguistic devices involved in communication. And this is not just as a performative thing, this is also as just you in your practice having a conversation with your environment, whether it's a hoop or a silks. It's kind of difficult to explain to the learner how unimportant it is that your accent is perfect, how unimportant it is that the words are all in the correct order, how unimportant at the beginning that you may stumble over the structure or the grammar of that sentence. Because if we're all just standing, like we're just in French class and we're just, tu es la plus belle chose de ma vie, tu es la plus belle chose de ma vie. And we're all saying it the same way, the same cadence, the same tempo, the same inflection, intonation, pronunciation. It's just literally lost its sentiment. So when people say, oh, semantics, I'm like, exactly, semantics. Humans are meaning making machines. That's what we do. And so when babies make mistakes, yeah, they're meaning making, they're meaning shifting. And I think if we're just in class learning how to do the perfect hip lock with straight legs, or this trick into this trick, or this sequence as a phrase, and we're never jumbling around the comma or the semicolon or the period or the exclamation mark, or delivering it with different, you know, breathiness or slowing things down or shouting your hip lock. All of those linguistic devices that can be used in the teaching of movement are completely lost on an internet generation. I just have to say it.
Right. Well, and completely lost on people who engage with, let's say, aerial arts for now, in the way that in the sense that you're talking about, that they want to just quote the quote, that
Mm.
that what they want to be able to do is the thing that they learned on Instagram. Like, okay, we're just copying the same sentence over and over, and you're just copying it now.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested, uh, and I will just totally just say it for myself, and say it without judgment to the people who do just want to quote the quotes. I'm more interested in people who want to explore themselves through the apparatuses. I'm more interested in people who want to use circus as a tool for either self-exploration or creative exploration, or kind of a journey towards, let's say, physical literacy. What does it mean to become physically literate by using circus skills? And this is one of the reasons I don't only teach a single discipline within circus, is because I think that physical literacy implies a way of seeing and interacting with the world, where when you look at the world, and this is where maybe we can talk about affordances for a moment, that when you look out on the world, you don't see only the way that you are supposed to interact with the world. You see all of the possibilities of interacting with the world around you, and you see all of the possibilities of what the world around you could be. And I think that's
Mm.
a really important way to see and think about the world and move through the world, because we don't live in a perfect world yet. And if we are all only able of seeing interactions that already exist, then we're missing the possibilities that exist for like a better or different way of interacting with the world, which is really what I'm after, you know?
Mm.
Um, but maybe let's back up for just a moment and talk about affordances. What what are affordances? You know what I'm super curious about? Maybe I'll ask it to you as a question, because I talk about affordances in the essay. Let's see, like, what about that idea got communicated in the essay that you understand? How do you understand what we mean by an affordance?
Yes.
And
And this is
there is
good because
not
you've put me
actually
on.
like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you've put me on the spot in a good way, because it's like this is how you know you've actually learnt, you've grasped some sort of an idea. And an affordance is a design feature in any environment which communicates to you the potential for an action movement. It's a design feature that invites you to take some sort of action. For example, you said before, a button invites us to press. We see a button, we think, oh, I must press that. We see a handle, we want to investigate which way the handle works. And the way that our environments look and appear to be, whether it's solid texture or soft and malleable, is going to communicate immediately before anything else the potentiality for movement. And that's what excites me. As you said, I love teaching multiple canvases because I think they all elicit something different, and they all ask you to solve different movement problems, think differently, move differently, partner with your apparatus in a different way, invite a different type of conversation. So an affordance for me in the movement space would be, okay, the silks is hanging right in front of me. It's split into two pieces, so I could separate the pieces and walk in between. I mean, there's so many different ways you can use a silks, because it basically isn't an apparatus. It's the most malleable configuration ever. I try to say this to my students, and I'm like, if you're getting frustrated with silks, that's because it's a million apparatuses in one. It changes the second you interact with it, which is really cool. Same as water, same as, and it's funny, you say like, if we're teaching people just, only how to sort of do one thing rather than explore, you do still have to learn. Like when someone looks at a hoop, they want to know from me, right, how do I get onto it? And I'm like, I don't know. How do you get onto it? They're
Yeah,
not interested in philosophy at that point. They're like, shut up, Rachel. Tell me the right way to get onto the lyra.
right.
But that is necessary. And same as when you're a kid and you're learning how to walk down a gravel steep driveway for the first time, you might just intuit, I'm going to have to lean back a little bit. I might keep a little soggy bend in my knees. I might change the angle of my foot. But you're not told all of those things explicitly by an adult necessarily. You just skate down and, get a graze on your forehead the first time you fall AOT. So it's kind of interesting because we do need to give our students lessons in the physics of what it is that they're interacting with. And it already will communicate something to them about that apparatus. But if we're only giving them that bit-sized information in piecemeal, they're never actually engaging in solving the problem of working with their apparatus.
Right. And figuring out like what are the best ways. And neither of us are advocates for like forcing your student to reinvent everything that's known about from fabric from scratch, right? Like there's loads of technique, there's kind of sometimes generations of things to be learned here. And so
Mm.
it is important to kind of like have your students walk along a path, like we all know, like wrap the foot, figure eight foot lock, we're going to wrap the foot and then we go around the pinky toe and under, like there are these phrases and ways of teaching and progressions that we all learn at some point, hopefully, and get to explore around. And how do you get to sitting on a lyra? But I think in holding that knowledge starts to become a little precious and starts to be kind of like, I'm going to teach you the way that it's done instead of like, well, how do you get on the lyra? Let's explore that. What are the problems? What are the boundaries here? What are the things about your body and your interaction here?
Mm.
And here's a way that's existed for a while. Like here's one of the traditional ways that we do this, or here's one of the things I want you to play with for now. Because we don't want the student to arrive in the middle of nowhere and have everything as a possibility. But we also don't want to narrow the field too far. And I think that's part of the fun of being a teacher in teaching this language or teaching movement language is kind of the level of knowing. If we think about like language acquisition and immersive learning, I'm not going to talk to a 4-year-old about Shakespeare or metacognition or like how the meaning of words is constructed. I'm going to talk to a 4-year-old in terms that a 4-year-old will understand about things that matter to a 4-year-old. And
Mm.
what's fascinating about that is that when you're actually talking to a 4-year-old, they're not asking small questions. They're asking, why is the sky blue? What is death? Like the cat died. What does that mean? And and you suddenly have to explain that in terms that a
Mm.
4-year-old will understand. And I think of beginning a new movement discipline or beginning a new movement journey as kind of the same question. Like, how do I get on the lyra is kind of a movement equivalent of like, why is the sky blue? And
Yeah.
and how we answer that question as teachers really kind of sets a starting point for our students in a really fundamental way. In a lot of ways, I think the way that you begin to learn movement, not just aerial arts or not just acrobatics, but the way that you begin to learn movement disciplines, whether you start really learning movement disciplines when you're young, or if you actually really start your journey when you're 19, 20, 21, 30, 40, 50, how we answer those fundamental questions is pretty important, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I love what you said about the fact that, like, when your baby or a smaller person is asking a question, right? A young person is asking a question. They're not small questions. They are conceptually grounded, delving into the very foundation of what is happening, because that's what they recognize as is meaningful information. Not, oh, hey, mum, how do I, perfectly whatever, whatever. They're like, why is the sky blue? What's death? What do you mean that the cat is like we're burying it in the back of the garden, but she's in heaven. What does that mean? You
What are
know,
you talking
and
about?
that's not a small question, even though, like you say, you have to explain it to terms in the that they understand, which you could, for argument's sake, you could, AKA, you have to explain the very essence of the knowledge. And that's what's kind of cool, because I feel like when I think of myself in certain scenarios where I would say I'm illiterate in this space, or I feel incompetent, a sense of incompetence rises, it's usually around me not even knowing how to form a question. That's what makes me feel dumb. That's what makes me feel literally dumb. Like I stop. I'm not stuttering, I'm not stumbling, I'm not mumbling my way through. I'm stopped. And that sense of incompetency, I see that often when movement, because literally it's much more obvious with movement because people literally stop. They freeze. And that's something that I'd love to like move away from with teaching aerials. I would love to move away from that like freezing and be able to stumble through, be able to stutter through, to be able to like, because when incompetence as a feeling arises, and you would know this from your nonlinear pedagogy stuff, the element of competence and relatedness and all those things that are important in the space of learning movement, it's it's something that immediately, as soon as you think I've done something wrong or I'm unsafe in this moment, it's a freeze, it's a stop. And so that's where the learning stops as well. And so when I feel like I can't create a question, that's what makes me feel incompetent.
Well, and one of the things that is a huge part of physical literacy research and theory is something very close to what you just described. They call it the confidence competence cycle. That there's a psychological kind of cycle that exists in concert with physical experiences, where if you tried some physical skill, any physical skill, you discover that you are, like bad at it, good at it, or somewhere in between. And that affects your sense of confidence in and
Mhm.
willingness to kind of try the thing again. And then you try the thing again. And your confidence either grows because you got better at the thing, or diminishes, erodes because it went worse. And then maybe you try it again. And we see how almost immediately confidence and competence enter either positive feedback loops with each other or negative feedback loops with each other. That as confidence erodes, competence diminishes, because not only are you feeling like you can't do it, but those feelings of not being able to do it affect your effort. And then your effort affects your success. And then your success affects your confidence. And then you end up not trying anymore. And the reverse is also true, that if you
Mm.
experience competence or early sensations of competence, you go, oh, maybe I can do this. And you can
Mm.
upcycle it up into more confidence and more willingness to try. And then you're like, oh, I almost got it. And then you're willing to put in more effort, whether that effort is intensity or duration or consistency, whatever the effort means for the thing that you're working on, you're willing to keep doing it. And so we see the things spiral with each other. This was some of my master's research was on what are the micro emotional experiences that kids have in PE class that we can find that reflect parts of this cycle. I specifically looked at 6 emotions that kids might experience during PE class, but the 2 biggest ones, what it turned out were the ones that had the most correlation relationship to self-esteem and confidence, were pride and shame. That when kids had experiences of shame in PE class, they also tended to have lower self-confidence. And we see that potentially as a result of this feedback loop. It's possible that that is some supporting evidence for the idea that you experience shame and then you stop trying and then you have less confidence. And the confidence and the shame work together to keep you from developing. We call it kids who have been derailed from physical literacy. The
Mm.
opposite is also true. When you experience pride, you're like, "Ooh, I'm proud of myself. Let me try that again." And we can cycle up. And the big question that I didn't get to in my graduate research, but that is the big question for the world, is how do we re-rail people who've experienced a sense of shame? How, like if someone is like, "Ooh, I'm not good at this," or "Oh, I don't want to try aerials because I don't have upper body strength," or ooh,
Mm.
like this thing doesn't feel good for me. What is, you know, what are the methods? What are the things we can do to take someone who feels really low confidence or really senses of shame around their body or around movement and bring them back into relationship with it?
Mm. I think when that happens in aerial classes, a sense of like I tried something, it didn't go well, I feel shame, or I'm losing confidence, therefore that competence starts to erode and it's a negative spiral. It can be easy for teachers to think, then I have to like cheerlead for you, or I have to be like, yes, you can do this, you got this. And it's like, ugh. I used to do that. I still do that sometimes. It's an easy fallback. But I
Yeah, me too.
think, how do we re-rail people to experience positive like feelings and emotions during a movement practice or learning? For me, it's two things. Getting people to understand that for me, learning is failing. So failing is learning. Um, Learn to fail or fail to learn. Yeah. And
Yeah, it
the
made
thing,
sense.
it makes sense. Yeah. Okay. I was like,
Yeah,
I always
yeah,
get
yeah,
mixed
yeah.
up with that stuff. But that class is supervised failure. In fact, if you're not failing, you're not learning. And I'm here to, as the expert, to guide you through failure. And then that is the expectation that you become better about failing, like that you have a better relationship to failure. And the second thing is kind of like learning that the movement environment is actually some place that's safe, that it's like we've all got a body, and curiosity is what usually leads adult learners to a movement class. And if that curiosity gets immediately squashed by perfectionism or by this is how you do it and that's not how you do it, which we've all done consciously or not in a class, we've all been like not like that, like this, then I think we revert back to, okay, well, I'm not good at this, so I shouldn't do this. And it's like interesting because like maybe curiosity in kids is is there, but in a different way. Not like, oh, I'm curious to see if I could become a really good silks person. They're like, oh, that's cool. It's a silks. I wonder how high I can climb up it. You know, the curiosity comes from like a deeper place that actually explores the physics of the apparatus in a way that it maybe doesn't happen in adults so much, which is why fluency seems like such a better alternative, because you can have a terrible accent, you can have the same 500 words in a language and still be able to access conversation with an entire population that speak that language, versus, you know, me over here trying to perfect my accent, try to learn fancy words, and all I can say is statements that I've revised and I can't say them in a different order, or I can just sing along to reggaeton. Like, whether it's imperfectly or not, that shame that can kind of come from thinking you need to do the thing right in order to do it at all is what's getting in the way of failing your
Right.
way towards competency.
Towards competency, towards fluency. And I think fluency and the analogy to language is just really spot on here, because
Mm.
if your approach to learning to speak a second language, say Spanish or French, is to wait until you can speak it perfectly to speak it at all, you're just
Mm.
never going to do it. You're just never actually going to become fluent, because that's not how language acquisition works. I would even go so far as to say that's not how any learning works. That's not how learning to read works. It's not how learning to write works. It's not how learning to walk works. It's not how learning to do a back handspring works. It's not how any learning works. And I understand that because of how school has been set up, because of how evaluative measures in school and learning have been set up, we have the impression that learning is about getting it right and is about crossing the bar and meeting the standard, right? But like any researcher or academic or regular person who gives even the smallest amount of thought to like how learning actually occurs in the world immediately recognizes that doesn't work. And now I'm not saying that the institution of education on the whole in the world is bad and has been done poorly. Like, we are a more educated race, species than we have ever been in the history of humanity. The literacy rate in 2026 of reading, of writing, of technology, of emotions, of psychology, like our species literacy of pretty much everything has probably never been higher. Now, there are probably some quibbles I can make with that, but let me hurrah my way to a point, which is
Yeah.
that, like, this isn't all bad, but we are at the very beginning of our understanding of what it means to learn and what
Mm,
education could or should look like in the world.
mm,
And I think it's an exciting time to be a movement teacher. I think it's an exciting time to be a teacher of any kind. But I also think that we really begin to recognize that the institutions and systems that served us well through the beginning of that process of educating the world, like, are no longer serving us in
mm.
the way that they did.
Mm. And like, if I boil it down to a really important question, which is why does it matter that we are or are not physically literate? Like, why does physical literacy matter to your average hobbyist, for example? For me, it's participation in the conversation. That's all it is. And so, fluency being a measure rather than maybe literacy or what you might think, sort of the connotation that comes along with that word, baseline assessment, us versus them, um, matters less, I think. Fluency is the ability to engage in the thing that allows you to access actual practice applied competence, not just. I think the invention of the internet, it makes people think that there is good information and bad information, and there absolutely is, but information is not what helps you learn. If access to information was what was going to make us smarter and more compassionate, better humans, then we've really got it. We've got everything we
That would have
need, and we're
happened.
still pretty messed up. So it's not about access to even the right information. I say this to people all the time. Like, if I'm not the right teacher for you, then there are literally billions of people on the planet who might be the best teacher for you. That doesn't mean that you can't learn from me and the information that I have, because everything that you're going to learn in your aerial practice is what you choose to apply. It's knowledge, which is like applied information. And yes, people respond badly if you just keep pushing like philosophically and being like, well, like asking these kind of rhetorical questions, because they're like, I'm just here to learn the thing. But it's this idea that if only I had access to the right video of someone slowing it down and showing me all the angles and telling me everything what not to do before I even try to do one thing, that's not learning. That's the opposite of learning. That's paralysis. I've experienced it. It's awful and it's exhausting. It's really
Yeah.
exhausting. And so we know inherently that other skills like digital literacy, you mess things up. You publish your website before it's finished, or you add a link on your story and it doesn't populate because you shared someone else's story and the link isn't active. And then you've learnt something by that mistake. And I call them beautiful mistakes with my students. I'm like, oh, they're like, was that it? And I was like, no, but that was a beautiful mistake. I loved it. I loved
Well,
what you did. That wasn't it, not even close. But what you did instead was gorgeous and totally valid. Let's try it again and see if you can do it this way. And I'm learning as I get more mature in that space of being able to like just facilitate people moving their way through beautiful mistakes, that actually my emphasis on the right way is still very ingrained and it's implicit from the way I teach. So
yeah.
that is an awareness thing. And I'll never erase it completely from their expectation of, hey, this is part of the learning experience. I need to learn the right way to do it. I can't erase that for them. What I can do is talk less about the right way, or, put a little bit more emphasis on what they found as totally valid and
Yeah.
give them more problems to solve. Give them more like, can you go ask that person over there in French for directions to the bathroom?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. Well, and I think one of
not can
the
you learn 3 words for a salle de bain? Like,
right. And I think one of the things that one of the concepts in nonlinear pedagogy and a little bit in physical literacy uh that really changed how I think about, like, are we doing it right or not, is the concept of a solution space. And I've talked
mm,
about this a lot, is that, like, every time we're engaging in movement or engaging in a thing, we're trying to accomplish a task. And the solution space is like a space in which like, we are succeeding at the task. And we get to define for ourselves, like, what is inside that solution space and what's not. I think about a back tuck on trampoline. I can really say it's time to flip over backwards. And the solution space at its very widest doesn't even include things like land on your feet or do it safely or repeatedly. At its very widest, the solution space of a back tuck is like, I'm going to jump backwards and we're going to like try to flip over, you know? Now, for me as a teacher, I start to constrict the solution space into like, okay, we need to not land on your head. Like the definition of success here is going to be no landing on your head. That needs to be prevented all the time.
Mm.
Uh, Other things you're not allowed to do, like what is the solution space that I'm comfortable with here? You don't have to land on your feet the first time that you do a back tuck. Again, anyone who's actually ever taught a back tuck knows that like, no, your student's going to land on hands and knees while they're learning a back tuck. There is no student that I know in the history of the world that has learned a back tuck and landed on their feet without putting their hands on the floor every single time. Like it just
Well,
doesn't.
there probably is, but we couldn't classify that as learning a back tuck. That's
Right. Yeah.
executing or performing a back tuck.
Right. Yeah. You've like done it, like, and there you go. If I'm wrong about that, that's great. Come for me. But like the idea here is the solution space is defined by, can we do it safely? Can we do it repeatably? Like, what are the boundaries that I'm comfortable with as a solution to this problem? And then how do I create environments in which students are solving that problem more often than not and starting to progress into more refined solutions or into more varied solutions. So the difference between a back tuck and a layout is a difference of shape, not really of kind, right?
Mm,
A layout is just a variation on a back tuck. The ideas all remain the same. We're just talking about different solution spaces. And in competitive sports like gymnastics, the solution spaces are very tightly defined and have become more tightly defined over the 60, 70 years that those sports have been in existence with codes of points attached to them. But
mm,
if we look outside of competitive sports into like recreational trampoline competitions or parkour or circus, we start seeing things like, okay, well, in gymnastics, the back tuck always has to be straight up over the head. We're looking for the really straight kind of linear line. But when we start looking at some of these parkour or freestyle trampoline people, they're actually starting to not starting. They have been for years, like doing back tucks off axis. What does it mean to not be in this axis, but to actually be
mm.
kind of doing a backward shoulder roll, but as a back tuck? What does it mean to be able to, God, what's the thing I saw the other day? I saw a layout step out, which is the kick as a layout step out into a full. So starting a layout step out and then bringing your legs together and adding a full twist before you come down onto the ground. And I was like, that idea was just sitting right there for someone to pick up for the last 20 years. But,
Yeah.
but no one's done it yet. And I think that is very much the direction that a lot of tumbling movement, parkour movement, and I think and I think aerial movement is going, is
Mm,
into these things. And how do we as teachers serve that directionality and serve that expansion and provide progressions that look at, well, what are the solution spaces, right? When we talk about how do you get on the lyra, your earlier question, how do you get on the lyra, how do you get to sitting on the lyra? There's a solution space that's actually quite wide for that question. How do you do a double back tuck? The solution space for that question is much smaller, right?
mm. But
um
still surface dependent, still like you say, difference between gymnastics and parkour, right? Gymnastics, yeah, you want to go up, you want to rotate, you want to land relatively in place for good reason. You don't want to go out of bounds in your floor routine, or you got to catch the bar. So you've got to go up and come down. But in parkour, you need it to travel. So this is where I think sometimes it can be like really easy to just kind of think, oh, like all this variation that Rachel's talking about, like shout your hip lock, whisper your hip lock, do the slowest hip lock you've ever done. Allow yourself to stop in the invert moment. Can you reverse it? Press play, rewind. Those things, they're not just random prompts because I am trying to like entertain you. This isn't daycare. I'm trying to actually elicit a fluency around that one great word that you now know. You know hip lock, but you don't just walk around the world going hip lock, hip lock, hip lock. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it matters because everything has an application, everything has an environment, it has specific things that are conducive to how success in that moment looks. And this is why I think of very mature aerialists who are fluent in the language of corporate, for example, know how to make in the moment adjustments to their technique based on extra bounce in their silks, based on going to a competition and being like, oh, okay, my this line has a lot more bounce. These tricks are going to be have to be altered in this way. That is a competency that exists on a spectrum that matters more to me than you being able to do 11 teen elbow rolls in a row.
Right.
Don't give a
Right.
crap. Right.
Right.
But I do need you to understand that the knowledge is not just the words, it's how you put it together, how you apply it. And then all those other things like tone, volume, speed, anything else, any other metric that we can mess around with, any variable that we can change is not just for the shits and giggles. It's so that in the moment that that's the needed step, you take it and you don't wait for
Right.
someone to go, oh, careful, there's a crash mat there.
Right.
Make sure you lift up your foot and step onto the crash mat. That's
Yeah.
instructive learning and memorizing and utterly, yeah, incompetence
Well,
making.
and I think one of the things that I've said before that I picked up from some of the researchers behind nonlinear pedagogy is this idea that expertise is defined by adaptability, not by execution, not by mimicry, right? Is, like you talked about a bounce in the silks. How adaptable are you to a bounce in the silks? How adaptable are you to changes in the environment in small ways? How much can you do your hip keys slow and fast and flex foot and bent leg? And and that we're building adaptability by training within variability, kind of not all the time, not every time needs to be totally different. We're still looking to build expertise, but we're not looking to build expertise in a single way at a single speed. We're looking to build adaptability. We're looking to, like, what is the how does this change on a smaller lira? How do trapeze beats change when I have bar ends and weight on the end of the bars? And how do I open my students' mind to the idea that their zone of research isn't just about their physical capacities, but is also about, like, the way they can change their apparatus? I run into this a lot in silks with spinning, as I have students who come to me and are like, I don't know why my spins don't work. I want that really fast tornado spin, like right at the bottom. And I don't know, like 5 times out of 10, the answer is you're doing everything right and your tails are way too long. Like you've got 10 feet of tail on the floor
Yeah.
and you're not going to get a really good tornado spin when you have 10 feet of tail on the floor. Like it's
Yeah.
going to twist and it's heavy and it's
Yeah.
just not going to happen in the same way. It's not easy to learn that skill that way. You just need to be on a shorter silk. And then they go to a shorter silk and they're like, oh, well, that was very easy. And I'm like, you can do this with 10 feet of tail on the floor, but let's not learn it that way. Like, let's
Yeah.
find that center balance point in the easiest way that we can and then expand on what we can do in it.
Mm.
But I think
And the
there's always
lesson there is about the physics of the apparatus. The lesson
yes,
isn't even cut your tails or go to a different studio or go to a different silk. That's not even, that's the action. But the lesson underneath that is learning the physics of what you're actually engaged with. It's an object human partnership. And that underlying concept is why I teach conceptually, because I'm like, sure, I can teach you another 10 movements, or I can perfect or correct what you're doing wrong with the movements that you already know. But that's not important information for you to develop aerial knowledge. Important information for you to get applied knowledge is know your canvas better, get familiar with your environment, exploring. I've been talking recently about aerial apparatuses more as terrain or like a landscape, and being able to actually stop and look around and observe and be able to move on that terrain in a way that is conducive to ease and sustainable movement and effortlessness. Everyone's always complimenting me on the effortlessness or the simplicity of my movement, which is such a backhanded compliment, but I'm learning to take
simplicity
it.
there.
I know. I'm like, oh, thank you. They're like, it's so simple. I'm like, yeah, it's just easy for me, I guess. But it's like I'm making it look simple because I understand the essence of, like
Right.
that's such an easy fix, right? Yeah, get your tails off of the ground. And you can do that in a number of ways. You don't even have to go on a different silks, but it depends on how much friction is going into the floor. Of course, that's going to slow down your spin and potentially wobble it off center. So knowing the physics of your apparatus is imperative because it helps like big things that you go to an expert with this big question and you're like, what is it? Students are like, what is anatomically different about me? Like, I'm different, I'm special, I'm making this one mistake. And I'm like, no, chances are I've seen it. Chances are I'll be able to, like it's not, you're not different, you're not flawed, you're not uniquely incompetent. You are unique, you are uncommon, you are unspecial, you are, and a lot of the times when people want you to iron out something in their movement, I'm like, your movement is just less practiced than mine.
Right.
That's it. That's it. I'm
Right.
not better
That's
than
it.
you. I'm not smarter than you. I just practice this more.
I've just been doing it for longer. And yeah, I mean, I think A, that's really true and really beautiful. And B, it is funny how everyone gets attached to what they view as their unique incompetences. They're like, no,
Oh yeah.
I am uniquely incompetent, right? Or I am
Yes.
uniquely injured or uniquely flawed or uniquely sort of
Yes.
broken in this way that makes me special. And I don't know, I feel all sorts of ways about that because I have those things about myself too that I'm like, "Oh, yeah, but my special broken thing." And we hold these special broken things about ourselves so closely, but I
Mm.
don't know that they serve us, and I am sure they don't usually
They
serve my
don't.
yeah,
They
I'm sure they
don't.
don't serve my students, but mine are serving me, Rach. There's the distinction, right? It's like when I see that in my students, I'm like, no, that's not actually serving you. We can move past that. We can train
I
through
am
that with
uniquely bad
fun.
at this, and there's nothing you can do to change it. It's that identity in affliction that like this is my identity. I'm afflicted. Hey, that's your unique. I recognize, yeah, I have a thing with musicality. People always tell me I'm good with musicality, but this one choreographer one time said one bad thing to me about my musicality. And it wasn't that like you're not hearing it. She's like, you're like literally walking to the music and you're doing everything on the beat. I want you to move through the music. And I just, for years after that, I had like a complex about like, oh, I'm actually rubbish at musicality. But also, how can you be good at musicality if you have no variability within your skills? So if you can't, like, you're like, oh, I'm not hitting the hip lock on the doom and I want to go boom. And I'm like, sure, but want versus willing. Are you willing to train your hip lock so that you can do it at various speeds? Because it's got nothing to do with you're behind the music. You just literally don't have the ability to execute at that speed. So enough with the like trauma complex about musicality. Yeah, you can practice that. I'm like, oh, that's not a thing. You can practice
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Do you want to
I
practice that?
right. If that's is that where you want to spend your time?
But we would
I think that
rather just advertise what we think we're bad at, right? We would rather go
right.
out and say, oh, I'm terrible at musicality. I'm uniquely afflicted with this inability to count. We would so much rather say that than go, I'm unpracticed at this move.
Right. Right. Or like this is a new thing for me. And then
Yeah.
deficit seeking I think happens across all my students in different teaching contexts and is and is a real thing that I look at really hard when in my teaching. I have some pretty strong boundaries around students who are deficit seekers, right? Who are like, how did I do that wrong? What am I doing wrong? How am I
Yeah.
bad? And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not a process of questioning. That's not a line of questioning that I'm interested in. I'm not going to
Yeah.
entertain those questions. I'm not going to answer those questions. Like, I'm not interested in the ways in which you're bad. I'm interested in the ways in which you're good. I'm interested in the ways in which you try hard. I'm interested in the ways in which you're interested in your own progress. Not if you're here to find new ways that you're wrong or new ways that you're bad or new ways that you're incompetent, like, I'm not on board for that journey. You're not going to have that journey in my class. I'm not going to let you.
I do not allow for that kink, and I just love that.
And if you're curious about your progress, and if you're curious about how to get better at a thing and how to be stronger and how to work within the
Mhm.
boundaries that you do have. I'm also not in denial about my students' various abilities. I work with a lot of students who are in their late 40s and 50s, and we work on handstands. And one of the realities of coming from very little movement background and doing handstands in your 40s and 50s is that you might never view moving into free space as worth the risk
Yeah.
because it might just never be worth the risk. I have some students who can kick up to a freestanding balance 2 feet from the wall and hold and never touch the wall and straddle down and do the whole shebang, who are uninterested in ever being in the middle of the room because they're not comfortable cartwheeling out. Their legs are a little tight to like do the thing. And falling on their back is just not worth the risk. And that's great. I'm on board with that. That's not deficit seeking because they've decided they
Yeah,
can
it's
do a
literally not
handstand.
a problem.
Right. That's
Not a problem.
literally no problem at all. You can do a handstand with your back to the wall forever and never touch the wall. And you just know that like that was fine with me. So there is a
Mm,
there's the kind of caveat, the nuance to what I'm talking about is like, no, I'm not talking about like, oh, your elbows don't straighten all the way, or oh, you can't do this thing because of XYZ. I'm talking about like, that's great. That's a unique part of your body. And we're going to move on from that and figure out how you can do this skill. Like, what is the way that this works for
mm,
you? And if you're interested in just dodging it forever and being like, oh, I just don't do this because I don't do it, I'm just more curious than that. I'm
yeah.
curious about, like how do we work on pistol squats with someone who has no ankle range of motion, right? Anyone can work on a pistol squat. What does that look like for someone who is in their 50s and 60s and, can't sit on their haunches and has trouble getting up out of a chair? Okay, but I can answer that question, like we can put your arms on the sides of your chair and we can put one leg on the floor and we can use arms and legs together and we can do it from a high surface so that that movement is very, very small. We can
Yeah.
work on a pistol squat within any of those limitations, and
And
I'm
that's
interested and curious about that.
Yeah, when you are working with an able-bodied population as well, you have to like imagine the limitations. Like imagine you couldn't. But when I was a physio undergrad, you go to hospital, you visit someone day one post-op after a total knee replacement, and you understand the textbook immediately. You never have to remember anything you learnt from the textbook anymore because you're like, oh, I know what it was like to try to get that patient up and take them to the toilet. I
Yes.
remember what it was like. They literally didn't have any knee flexion range of motion whatsoever, and all of the social and the emotional, psychological aspects of everything that's going on in that patient's mind and body. So, like, that's what I love about when we say, oh, like introducing. I've always said limitations are great for creativity, but we've sort of got to be creative in the first place to come up with them. We're like, imagine. I know this is a stretch, but imagine you couldn't walk, like, or
Right.
something really hard. But once you've had disability in your life, if you've had an injury, if you've had, you and I deal with chronic back pain and other injuries from our careers and otherwise. And once you've had limitations, you then understand, like, oh, you can. It's almost like your eyes are opened up to the possibility because of those limitations. But when you sort of have, let's say, an able body, or you have everything that you need to solve a problem one way, and you can very easily identify when you're looking at someone like, oh, she's doing it the same way as I'm doing it, but it just looks nicer on her. There's this real closing down of the solution space. And
Right.
curiosity doesn't live in that space because it's like,
Right.
where's to be curious? And the opposite, when you whether either impose a limitation from the outside in or you have a limitation, it's almost as if like, oh gosh, there's 10 different ways I could do this or strengthen this. And I learnt that with physio, and I do that still even when I teach Pilates to populations that are less able, because you're like, oh, there's always ways to strengthen, there's always ways to mobilize, to achieve movement action. It's just gotta look different.
And I think as we begin to wrap up or find a place to end, one of the things that I think we're both talking about is like, what is the curiosity at the root of being a teacher, and how does that curiosity feed into our students? And one of one of the fun ideas about affordances in my mind, or one of the fun ideas about fluency or literacy in my mind, is recognizing that affordances don't just exist in the physical world, they also exist in the social world. You were talking about, like when we meet a new person and our job is to teach them movement, we immediately intuitively see the social affordances that person is presenting to us. We see them in their body language. Are they nervous to be there? We see them in their responses to our questions or their non-responses to our questions. All of those things are opportunities for action in the social plane. And I'm so interested, and I know you're so interested in what it means to be a creative teacher and what it means to look at the social affordances, at the social environment that we find ourselves in as movement teachers and say, what are ways I could interact with this environment differently? Everyone right now is looking at me like I'm in charge and I'm supposed to tell them what to do.
Mm.
And that means I have to meet them where they're at, but I'm going to meet them where they're at and take them somewhere else. Once I meet them where they're at, where are we going to go? What am I going to do? What am I trying to do with my teaching approach? And what are the social affordances or the psychological affordances in addition to the physical affordances that like
Yeah, of
occur in the
course.
world around us?
Because if as many different environments as there are, mental environment, social environment, physical, then affordances exist. You're right. I hadn't actually thought of it like that. I'm always thinking about the canvas, the apparatus, the physical environment, the things that we see with our eyes or feel. So that's a kinesthetic sort of interaction with it. But yeah, you're right. I've got a few students at the moment actually that are challenging me in that direction to kind of think like, talk about being a creative teacher. It's like what I'm not talking about teaching creatively. I'm talking about or teaching creativity. I'm
Yeah,
thinking more these days about like creative teaching, like
right.
making sure. Remember we talked about that first conversation. The bar is so low. Has learning occurred? Good class. Has learning
Good,
actually occurred? Good class.
good class. We did. That's all I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I had this conversation with my one-on-one just before I got on with you, like actually saying and educating her and saying like you think you're having a bad lesson and the other time you're thinking you had a good lesson, both of them are lying to you. Strength does that. Your strength is like an aggregate. So when you could do a 10-second hold on the silks, you thought that was your baseline. It's not. Today, when you can't hold for 3 seconds, you think that's your baseline. It's not. You're not what you're doing in one moment. You are aggregate movement and solving problems and all of the other things. And so, like, thinking that I had a bad lesson last time and I have a good lesson, it's like actually the bad lessons are where you're making more mistakes. And so you're actually better at learning today than you were last
Yeah.
time when you were doing it or when you were getting it.
Wow, I love that language you just used and feel like that's such a good ending moment for the first half of the conversation on physical literacy is this idea that like remember that you are the aggregate of all of your physical experiences. That it's not about the one lesson, it's not about the one moment in the thing. It's like learning happens in aggregate. There's not one data point that matters. It is the accumulation, the aggregation of all of these little movement experiences throughout your life, throughout your class, throughout your lesson. That's a really beautiful thought there that I think is really cool. Rachel, that was a lovely conversation. I find myself in the middle of it and going like, oh, I can't wait for next month to dive into the second half of that essay and unpack more about kind of the alignments between literacy and language and fluency and how we teach movement and how we learn movement.
Yeah, my favorite topic. I love these conversations. Thanks. Been great.
Yay. Thank you. And I will see you again next month. I'm excited. I think that my favorite part of making my outros for these episodes is getting to listen to them again. The idea that you are the aggregate of all your movement experiences, positive or negative. And what does that mean for us as teachers as we try to both show our students that they are aggregate and make those experiences something that they can be proud of. Thank you so much for listening to the first half of our conversation. The next one is going to come up in mid-May. I am excited to see you there.